Right? So in terms of diffusion, you have two beakers. One beaker, pure water. Pure distilled water. No salts, nothing in there. Just water. Right? And the other beaker, here's beaker A with the pure water, beaker B with water and lots of sodium chloride. Lots of it. Sodium and chlorine, lots of it. Interspersed throughout the whole, right, beaker right here. So when we connect them, what happens? Well, what happens is this. Solutes always move from higher concentrations of solute to areas of lower solute concentration. So it always moves from high to low. So then we can have equilibrium. So the sodium chloride on one side, they start to bump each other and move to the area that is empty. Eventually, you'll have the same amount of sodium chloride here as here. And now we hit equilibrium. This is the law of diffusion. Law of diffusion is how gases move into our cells. So if your cell is very active because you're working out, what happens? Well, that active muscle uses a lot of oxygen. So it's got very low oxygen content inside the cell. The blood going to that area is going to have very high oxygen content because it just came from the lung, just came out the left ventricle. So you have high oxygen content in the red blood cell, low oxygen content in the skeletal muscle. Oxygen just goes right through into the skeletal muscle because of this simple law of diffusion. Now, keep in mind, our cells contain fats called phospholipids. It forms a border, a boundary. So then only other fats and oxygen and gases can get in and out. Other things like proteins can't get in and out. All right? It needs help. Glucose can't get in and out. It needs help to get into our cells. That's where insulin comes in. Insulin allows receptors to be placed into the cells of your body. Right? Without it, what happens? Well, if you see somebody as a type 1 diabetic and they don't give themselves insulin, the sugar that they have eaten is stuck in the bloodstream. It can't get into the cells that require it. So even though their blood sugar is astronomical, very little of it gets into the cells that need it. Why? Because insulin is not present. Insulin is required for the glucose to be brought into the cells. How does it do that? Insulin activates formation of glucose protein receptors, right? Once that happens, then it can go into the cell, right? But that follows the law of diffusion as well, right? Diffusion is always the movement of solutes from higher concentrations to lower concentrations. Does it require energy at all? No, right? No energy required for diffusion to occur. Now, sometimes in our body, we actually want to go in reverse, right? We want to have a low concentration of potassium. We still want to pump it out, right? So then, we can even make it lower, right? When that happens, then we have to put in energy. Any questions about diffusion? Again, right, diffusion is like running downhill. Doesn't require energy, it's just movement of solutes from high to low. Right? Example as well is when you go into here we don't have elevators, but I think there's one elevator. Right, downtown, you're in an elevator, and there's like 4 other people there. Do you guys all cluster right in the middle? They kind of move apart, don't you? So then you're almost like in each, right, corner, and somebody's right in the middle, right? That's what happens. We have that same kind of spatial diffusion when we go in areas where there's a lot of people and not a lot of room. Take a look right here, and you'll notice that, again, only certain things can go through the plasma membrane, right, without help. So very few things can go in and out of the plasma membrane without any help. Why? Because a plasma membrane is a boundary. It's a border made out of fat. So other fats, like anabolic steroids, is a testosterone, it's a type of fat, can get into your skeletal muscles. That's why it works so well, is because it actually can go through the plasma membrane of your skeletal muscles, can go through the nuclear membrane, and directly activate protein synthesis, right? Nothing else can do that. Now, what other things can get in and out without help? Gases, right? Gases can get in and out without help. Everything else requires a receptor that we see here, right? Sodium is a salt, can't get in and out. It needs a receptor for it to go through. But it only goes through because of diffusion. We're gonna see, there's gonna be a lot of sodium on the outside of the cells, very little inside. Sodium wants to go in, right? But unless the protein receptor is open, sodium cannot be brought in, right? Once it's open, sodium follows its solute gradient from high concentration down to lower concentration. Now, when it needs help, we say it has facilitated diffusion. So you have some kind of protein that facilitates or helps diffusion occurring right here. Now, osmosis. What is osmosis? So this is diffusion. What is osmosis? Osmosis is going to be the movement of water from an area of lower solute concentration to area of higher solute concentration across a semi-permeable membrane. Now, this is important right here. This semi-permeable membrane, right, is important. What do we mean by this? We use an example of what happens when we have a tank of water and now we put your red blood cells in it. So we just put a couple droplets of your red blood cells, right? Or sometimes they use salt water in a water balloon, right? So what happens? Imagine it's salt water, right? Instead of red blood cells. Red blood cells will work, but it's hard to see. So you have this big water balloon filled with saline. Lots of sodium chloride, lots of water. Now, because you have a balloon and it has latex in it, that's our semi-permeable membrane, right? Salts can't get through, but water can. What happens here? Right? The salt, if it wasn't for that latex, right, you have high solute here, no solute in the surrounding water. If it wasn't for the latex, sodium just moves out, and we have simple diffusion. But because we have this semi-permeable membrane, the solute can't move out. What can move, though, is the water. The water moves from this area of lower solute, where there's no solute at all, it's just pure water, right? And the water goes to the area of higher solute concentration, causing the balloon then to swell. Now, in our body, this happens, all right? And we'll talk more about it next semester, but in terms of osmosis in the cells right here, there's a reason why when you go into the emergency room and you're dehydrated, they don't just give you some Gatorade until you get out, right? Or give you some pure water until you get out. They give you saline and maybe a potassium rider, right? So what they want to do is give you liquids that are isotonic. It's got the same concentration of salts as your plasma. That's what saline should have, same concentration of solutes. As you put it into your IV, what happens? It's easily incorporated. That water doesn't want to move anywhere. Now, what happens if you were dehydrated, or God forbid, who remember a few years ago when the Nintendo Wii was really popular? right? I know, you guys are probably pretty young, right? Nintendo Wii was impossible to get. I remember my son wanted it. I stayed outside Best Buy to try to get it. Yeah, crazy, right? I kind of wanted it too, right? So what happened was, they were having an actual, game for Nintendo Wii to buy it. And it was called, this happened in California, and it's a real story, right? It was called Hold Your Wii to Win a Wii, right? And what you do is drink water, gallons of water, and whoever held their urine the longest won the Nintendo Wii. Because it's just water, right? Nothing is wrong with water. Nothing is wrong with water if you let yourself urinate. If you let yourself urinate, you can drink gallons of it. Now, you'll be in the bathroom every 2 minutes, but you're able to get rid of it. The problem with those people and the person that won was that they held their urine too long. And what happens is this. When you drink all that water, right, all of your plasma becomes filled with water. Water wants to move at that point. And it starts to move out of the cells, move out of the bloodstream, and into all the cells of the body. So what happened with her, right, was that their water that should be in the bloodstream, well, now as we put water into the bloodstream, more and more water, we should be urinating it out, but she's not urinating, right? You kind of decrease the concentration and you dilute the osmolarity in blood. Water then in the bloodstream started leaking out. As it started moving out of the bloodstream, it first went to the tissues of the leg, and she started to swell up in the leg, right? Eventually, right, it causes swelling in the brain, and she had cerebral edema, and she herniated her brainstem as a result of it, right? Now, if you have swelling in the rest of your body, it looks terrible, right? But you can live with it. When you have swelling in the brain, there's a very small hole called the foramen magnum, right? It's small, it's big compared to all the other holes, but what happened is you can push your brainstem right through the foramen magnum, right? At that point, you're gonna have massive seizures and you're gonna die, right? And she died from this. And they did like amazing things to try to save her life, right? But by the time she went into the emergency room, she was having seizures continuously. So they had to put some paralytic in her, and they removed the parietal bone, so then hopefully the swelling in the brain swelled more upwards, not downwards, right? It's not like you can vacuum the brain up and then kind of pull it up, right? So once it started swelling downwards, there's no hope, right? She died a couple days afterwards. And obviously, the people that did the actual game actually got fired because of it. But that's when you have to think, right? Is it really worth it? People think that water is safe. It is, but you got to let yourself urinate. Right, we'll stop right here.